So we are now here in the solutions area of the RSSB service desk. You can see the location by looking at home, solutions, SMIS definitions, SMIS sub-event definitions, and we're currently in the public behavior form sub-event definition. And again, there's 3 for each of the sub-events that you can add on the form. So let's head to the person in prohibited area section of the guidance. So we're in the person in prohibited area section of this page, and we can firstly see the definition. So the definition is any case of a person in an area in which they are not permitted to be at the time. It includes some further guidance explaining that the platform train interface is a prohibited area when boarding or alighting of a train is not in progress, and that a level crossing is never a prohibited area. Next, we have details of the SMIS reporting scope, which is an excerpt from Table B of the SMIS application matrix. So you've got the event category, description of the reporting scope, who the events should be entered in SMIS by. So here it can be entered by the infrastructure manager, it can be entered by the station operator if someone is accessing non-public areas of stations, or even the railway undertaking if someone is accessing a non-public area on board a train. Also, in terms of RIDDOR, there are no associated RIDDOR dangerous occurrences in relation to person in prohibited area, except for the common regulations 4, 5, and 6, which can be reported on all sub-event forms and relate to persons being injured. Next, we have a list of what types of events are included under person in prohibited area, which include things like people dangling legs over platform edge, train surfing events, passengers being overcarried into yards, depot sidings, and uncontrolled train evacuations. Next, we have exclusions. So excluded under this category are workforce in prohibited areas. For this, you would use the SPADS and railway operating incidents form, specifically the railway operating incident for workforce being where they shouldn't be. And then we also have any person in an area in prohibited area which leads to a personal accident. Personal accident as the last thing that happens is the form that you would enter it on, and then you would add the person in prohibited area as a prior event. Then finally, we have a list of event scenarios which explain and show you best practice in terms of how to enter particular types of events. So now we have opened the public behavior form, and let's head over to the location section. Remember, we are just looking at the location section in the context of person in a prohibited area. So there are 2 key pieces of on-screen guidance that I want to point out. First up is the text here in relation to the platform train interface, or PTI question, which provides you with a definition to help you answer the question here on the left. It says, a platform train interface PTI incident involves the person wholly or partially crossing the boundary between the platform and the track, or the platform and the train, if present, unless deliberately using the PTI to access the track to commit trespass or suicide. What this last bit is basically saying is that you never select yes to the PTI question if a person is deliberately accessing the track from a station platform. The second piece of on-screen guidance in relation to this particular type of sub-event refers to the location type field here, which advises you to use the train location type for events that occur on board a train or for train surfing events. So here we can see the option of train under the location type. So this means that for events involving people that occur on board a train, such as, say, a passenger injured whilst wholly on board a train, or a passenger overcarried into a yard, depot, or siding, you should select train as the location type. Just a note of caution, if you don't select the location type of train in these instances and instead use an alternative such as running line, when extracting the data in Jaspersoft, you will be unable to determine that the event occurred on board a train. Let's look at the main sub-events section for person in prohibited area. So I'm going to go to the sub-event section repeater and add person in prohibited area. You can see immediately the red bar appearing, which is the object guidance, to remind you about adding objects to this event type, which in relation to person in prohibited area is the person object, so the person that was in the prohibited area. But I'll cover people, trains, and objects in a future section of the video. So the person in a prohibited area form questions include: were they on or near the line or moving towards the line? That was the person seen within 10 feet of the nearest rail of any line, including the platforms. Also, overcarried passenger, so had the person remained on the train as it went out of service? Were they overcarried to a yard, depot, or siding? Then finally, we have the entry point known and the exit point known questions. These two questions are extremely useful and allow you to add additional location information if, say, the entry and exit points differ from where the person was reported being seen when they were trespassing, which would alternatively get entered in the main location section. Let's say, for example, the trespasser was spotted on the running line. So the main location type would be running line, but you know that the person gained access to the track via a station platform. Here you would select entry point known as yes. Then you can select the entry point type. So in this case, we would say it was a platform. Again, you see the red bar object guidance appear, which reminds you that you need to add the platform that was used as an item or structure under the people, trains, and other objects section. And you can select the role of used a prohibited area entry point. But again, I'll cover this in the people, trains, and objects section in a bit. So the exit point works exactly the same way as the entry point, the only difference being that if you need to add an object, say for the platform, the role that you would select for this object would be prohibited area exit point instead of the entry point for the previous question. Staying within the sub-event section, we'll move down to prior sub-event, where you get to add one prior event if it led to the main event. You can add any of the currently available simplified SMIS sub-events as prior events if one of these has led to the main public behaviour event. An example of a prior event to a person in prohibited area is, say, a suicide intervention attempt resulting in the suicidal person going onto the running line. So in this instance, you would select prior sub-event is yes. Then you get this section repeater, so add the prior sub-event to the public behaviour event, and we will look for intervening in a suicide or self-harm event. This way, when extracting data in Jaspersoft, you'll be able to tell that an intervention, suicide intervention, was carried out before the person went onto the running line. Now we will look at the people, trains, and other objects section in relation to person in a prohibited area, where I'm going to point out some of the more common objects that you would be expected to record in relation to this sub-event, which you were reminded of via the red bar guidance that we previously looked at on the main sub-event. I'll also go through some of the roles that you'd need to select for each of these objects. So let's go to the people, trains and other objects section. So I've already added the objects, but again, you can add the objects via the section repeater here. So let's first look at the person object. For the person object, we would select the role of in a prohibited area. And almost all of these person in prohibited area events will need to have a person object added. Next up, we have the group object. So the group can be used if, say, you have a group of youths trespassing on the line where you don't have the individual personal identification details. So in this instance, you would add group, and there's a role here for in a prohibited area. And lastly, we have item or structure. This is where sometimes you might need to add the entry and exit points. So say for the early example where you were asked to add the station platform as the access point via the red bar guidance on the main sub-event. So you would add item or structure. You then have the options here to say prohibited area entry point if it was the entry point, or prohibited area exit point if it was the exit point. You then need to, if we take the previous example where we need to add the platform, you would say that it was a structure. We've got guidance here to explain that. The structure type, you then would select platform. You then get the field to ask you to add the platform number, and then you get the station question, which is basically the same as the station. It's the same as the station asset list in the location section. So if we wanted to select Euston, we'd go in here, we'd type in Euston, and Euston Station would come up. So you'd be able to say that Euston Station was the entry point for the trespass. Finally, let's go through some of the more common possible causes for the person in a prohibited area sub-event. So let's go to the possible causes section. If we open up the drop-down and go to human performance factors, non-work related activities. So first up, we've got the group of antisocial behaviour, where we'll find common causes such as stealing, thrill-seeking or leisure activity, and vandalism, not graffiti. Then if we go back to this level, some of the other common ones for person in prohibited area are suicide or self-harm, with the suicide or attempted suicide being another common cause. And then finally, we have trespassing. So within this group, some of the common causes are person taking a shortcut, evading a third party, and finally retrieving an item. So they're some of the common causes for person in prohibited area.